Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of the Intentional Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host, Greg Campion, and I'm psyched to have with me today Kevin Smith. Kevin is the CEO and co-founder of Snipd, S-N-I-P-D, a company that is reinventing how we listen to and interact with podcasts by leveraging artificial intelligence. I started using Snipd last year, and it's become an integral part of my own routine when researching new topics or just trying to remember all the great insights that I'm hearing on all of my favorite podcasts. I asked Kevin to come on the show and kind of nerd out with me a little bit on all things AI, podcasts, and the future of learning. I'm super interested in all of this stuff, so if you are too, I think you'll enjoy this episode. Make sure you stick around to the end to hear some excellent Switzerland travel recommendations from Kevin, who is based in Zurich. Finally, remember, I recap every episode of Intentional Wisdom in my newsletter, also called Intentional Wisdom. You can find that at gregcampion.substack.com. It's one email every week. It's got everything that I'm learning, all the content I'm consuming, and really anything else that I think my friends might find interesting that I'm coming across. So head over to gregcampion.substack.com to subscribe. And that's enough intro. Here's my conversation with Kevin Smith. All right, Kevin Smith, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Greg. Nice to be here.
Yeah, nice to have you here. You might be the first guest from Switzerland that I've had on the podcast. So,
Ooh.
Yes.
So the pressure is high to represent Switzerland in a good way.
Huge. I know it's a fun time of year over there with all the skiing and everything else. So maybe I can get some tips at the end of the episode from you on all that.
Definitely.
All right, good stuff. So just a little background for the audience. You and I connected a few weeks back on Twitter, also known as X now. And I had commented, or posted that I'm really enjoying using Snipd, which is the app that you and your team have launched and the business that you're running. So you're CEO and co-founder of Snipd. And you had replied, thanks. And by the way, your pod looks really interesting. You know, maybe we should chat sometime. One thing led to another, and here we are. So, yeah.
That's the magic of Twitter.
Exactly. So what I'm hoping to do in this conversation, I want to talk about Snipd and the business that you're running. And it's a tool that I have found recently, and it's become like part of my daily routine. In fact, I have like a list, an article that I write every year called a few of my favorite things around the holidays. And I included Snipd this year in that because I've been so impressed with it. So I want to talk to you about that. It's basically a podcast player that leverages AI. I'm sure it's a lot more than that, and we can dive into that, but I'm finding it super useful. So I want to talk about that, but I want to use that almost like as a launching off point to have a broader conversation around this idea of leveraging technology in smart ways so that we can get better at sort of collecting knowledge and wisdom and information, and then using it effectively in our lives instead of having things go in one ear and out the other, as I'm sure I've been doing for years and years and years. So maybe let's start by just seeing if you can talk to us a little bit about what Snipd is. And maybe I'm curious, you've kind of gone all in on this. So I'm interested in like what was that opportunity that you saw that you said, all right, I'm ready to quit my job and build a company around this whole thing.
Yeah, maybe I can start with just like really briefly what Snipd is. So the easiest way to describe it is it's an AI-powered podcast app for people who listen to podcasts to become more knowledgeable. Mm-hmm. And before I describe everything that Snipd does, I'm happy to go, take a step back. Like, why did we start doing this? So I mean, for me, we basically saw two things that were happening. Like, one, podcasts until this day, I believe it's one of the largest sources of knowledge out there that is highly underutilized. And the second part was that with everything that's happening in AI actually offers us a completely new way of how to engage with this content or with this source of knowledge to make it much more usable. And so this, let's say, realization or hypothesis, we actually came up with that, I think now 3.5 years ago. So this was actually before ChatGPT. But it basically all started with my background is in AI. I was doing a lot of things with NLP. So that's all of the text AI things. So everything that these days we call LLMs.
Okay.
And at the same time, this paper came out where they used the same underlying model AI structures and technologies and applied it to speech. And they had some amazing results. And that was basically the moment when we said, hey, everything that's happening with text, it will actually translate over to speech. And you will just be able to interchangeably move between these two formats. And that will open up a completely new way of how to engage with spoken audio content, what to do with it. That was sort of the starting point of it, without us exactly knowing where we're going to end up with all of this. But it was enough of, there was enough excitement, let's say, for us to say, okay, let's do it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what's that last 3.5 years been like, I guess, since that initial sort of idea and, hey, there's something here? What's that kind of journey been like for you?
So the journey, I think looking back, the thing that I remember the most, so this is the first startup that I've ever done myself. Before that, I was an employee at an early stage startup, but really doing it yourself, I have to say, is quite different. And the one thing that stands out to me is actually much less about the product and what we've built, but much more about the emotional roller coaster ride that you go through. So that is by far the number one thing I underestimated. It's like someday you feel like you're conquering the world, nothing can stop you. And just 2 days later, you think like, okay, you're about to run out of money and we don't know what we're doing here anyway. And the last feedback that just came in was some negative review.
Yeah.
And you just start to question everything.
Right.
And then it goes back to, like the super positive side of things. That's my number one takeaway.
So the stakes when you're doing something like this, when you're going all in, like the stakes are high. They're much higher than if you were doing this, a 9-to-5 job or whatever. And so, I can imagine, that's the highs and lows must be really something. What have you found? And we'll get into Snipd in a second. I just want to sidebar here about, have you found anything that's like particularly helpful for dealing with that, the highs and the lows, like anything that you found there?
So for me personally, what's helped the most is just this realization that it's part of the journey. So it's a bit like you can use this analogy again with the roller coaster ride. If you're on a roller coaster, if you realize that you are on a roller coaster, then it's supposed to go up and down and left and right, and it's supposed to be wild. And as soon as you have that realization that your life is not at risk, you can actually start to enjoy these ups and downs quite a lot. And this took a while for me in the beginning to get used to, have this realization, and then just sort of always take a step back and look at it a bit more differently, and not, oh, my life is I'm about to die or something like that. I would say that is the thing that has helped me the most. But more like actionable things or routines, practices that I've started doing that definitely help is I do a workout every morning before going to work. I ride my bike to work every day, which gives me, some time just disconnecting, fresh air.
That's great.
I have various rules like no phone in bed, no phone immediately when I wake up. I'm not allowed to pick up my phone. And once a year I take off 2 weeks. I go on holidays for 2 weeks where I completely detach from anything that has to do with Snipd. Even though I don't want to, I force myself.
Yes.
I don't allow myself to listen to podcasts even during these 2 weeks, because it just, brings up so many ideas like, oh, we should be doing this, we should be doing that.
Right.
And that, yeah, those things have helped. Yeah.
Good. What do the workouts usually look like? What do you do there?
So currently, the first thing that I usually do is rowing, sort of like almost like a warm up. Mm-hmm. And then after that, I do 2 to 3 different exercises that ranges from bench pressing to body weight exercises, just anything basically.
Yeah. Nice. I like the riding the bike to work thing. Like that's a nice luxury that you have there in Zurich too. I think it's probably more of a biking or cycling accessible type of city. So that's a nice thing. And all the kind of health and wellness experts that I speak to are talk so much about the power of just like getting morning light in your eyes, natural sunlight. There is just something to be said for spending that time outside, especially if you're moving your body. So I think that's a great routine. All right, we may come back to some of that stuff because I'm quasi obsessed with like routines and all that kind of stuff. But let's talk about Snipd. All right, let me tell you a little bit maybe how I'm using the tool, and then you tell and like what I found really helpful, and then maybe I'm interested from somebody who is deep in the weeds on this to tell me how I'm using it all wrong and how there's so much more there. So, all right. So basically, the background for me is I found that, or with regards to Snipd, is I think I might have heard somebody mention it on a podcast or mention that there may be a tool like this out there. And then it got me down a rabbit hole, kind of Googling and seeing what was out there. And that's when I found Snipd. So anyways, what I liked the idea of, my situation is I'm usually at least 3 days a week. I'm commuting, so I'm driving like 45 minutes both ways in and out of the city, and I'm listening to podcasts, and I'm trying to learn. Whether it's preparing for this podcast or whether it's just learning about something related to fitness or health and wellness or personal improvement. I've recently gotten super interested in executive coaching. So I'm trying to make use of that time. And I have that really natural curiosity and desire to learn. But I've realized the problem, I guess it's the same problem that you guys realized in launching this company, is that like I'm taking in so much information, but like how much of it is actually getting acted upon? It's kind of like in one ear and out the other to some degree, So anyways, long story short, what I did was I found Snipd. I saw that you guys have a hookup to Readwise. So you guys should get like a commission from Readwise because once I got Snipd, then I got Readwise. I already had Evernote. So here's what I do now. I listen to a podcast. So I'll be like, okay, I'll use Zone 2 training as an example. Let's use a real example. So I actually was recently listening to an episode of the Huberman podcast. I was trying to get smart about eye health because I've had dry eyes recently. And I'm like, okay, let me go down a rabbit hole there and learn what I can learn about eye health. So anyways, found like a 2.5 hour Huberman Lab podcast. He's got an expert on talking about eye health. So I'm listening through Snipd. The episode has already been processed through your AI because other people have already listened to this episode and made their own snips. So I'm listening. So every time I hear, and I'm driving in my car, but thankfully the UX is super, user experience is super easy to navigate. You don't have to mess with a lot of buttons and stuff. But and every time something is said that I basically want to remember, I just hit the create snip button. And what happens is, and you tell me if I'm describing this right, but basically the Snip software or AI generates an AI generated summary. It then, since I have it connected to Readwise and Evernote, what it does is then it sends that to Readwise, which is its own tool that will resurface content for you. It sends you an email once a day with different things that you had highlighted. And then I also have it sending that then from there to Evernote. So then when I go to Evernote, I can open up that podcast and I have basically a whole summary of that podcast, and all of the parts that I thought were really interesting are summarized there for me. So then I can go back to that whenever I want. So anyways, that's my really long-winded way of describing what the tool you created does. But like, is that basically more or less right? And then what are some of the other interesting things it does?
Yeah, I think that was a good description. So there are always two ways to look at what our app does. The one thing is it's just an AI-powered podcast app. So on the one hand, we've taken almost every aspect of a podcast app and have redesigned it with an AI-first mindset. So we have things like AI-generated transcripts, AI-generated chapters. We extract who's the guest of the podcast together with a short mini bio. You get quotes. We identify which books got recommended on the podcast.
Yeah, I want to highlight that because I literally just saw that this morning, and I was like, wait a minute. There's a thing that shows all the books that are mentioned, and it like has the picture of the book and everything. And then if you click on that, it'll like link you to somewhere on the web where you can find more information about the book. Like that is huge. Like, because that's always something I've been like, oh God, Tim Ferriss mentioned this book about something. What the heck was that? Like, so props on that function.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think these are all examples of many different single AI features that I would just summarize as, look, it's an AI-powered podcast app where now these days you can just do so much more than what you're used to like the old school podcast app. But the other angle of how we actually look at it is always like, what's our goal? Our goal is always to help you learn more effectively from spoken audio content. So what you described in the very beginning, how you described yourself, is very typical of our users. These are, people like myself. I listen to podcasts while I ride my bike in the morning and do the workout. So it's usually time where you're doing something with your eyes, but your brain is idle, and you can actually use that time productively to learn something new that you're interested about. What we want to help you do is actually that you take something away from it, because it's, especially this day and age, there's so much content out there, and it's so easy to just keep pushing more and more content into your ears, but actually not really retaining anything. And audio, or podcasts with this audio format in particular, is even more difficult here than, let's say, if you read blog posts, because you can't just go back to a podcast and do Command F to search something or skim through it again. I would say on this, from this perspective, there are really two features that usually resonate the most with our users. And the first thing is what you described. It's what we call snipping. So it's the ability to save any insight that you hear just by tapping your headphones, or in Apple CarPlay, tapping a button, or even on the steering wheel, you can also use the skip back button to create a snip. And our AI creates an AI-generated note for you, together with the original transcript and the original audio, so that you can also always go back to what was really said word by word. And this allows you to, afterwards actually come back to the things that were most interesting to you. For people who don't want to even tap their headphones, we even offer that the AI creates these snips for you. So every time the AI believes, hey, here's a valuable insight, it saves this for you, and you can afterwards go through and say, hey, this was interesting, this was not interesting, and you can just swipe them away.
Okay, because I hear there's like a little chime that goes off when you're listening, when it's creating a snip like on its own. I didn't know if that was like, you know how like when you're reading a Kindle book, like you can see highlights, like this section was highlighted by lots of people or whatever. Yeah. So it's not a section that a lot of people have highlighted. It's the AI is doing that work. Is that right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. What else?
Yeah, and as you mentioned, we also offer. So a lot of our users, they review their snips, they come back to them within the Snipd app, But for those people who already have notes apps, we actually offer to sync these snips with your favorite notes app like Notion or Readwise. And through Readwise, there's so many apps that are supported by this. And yes, also from our side, we also love Readwise. They are amazing.
If our listeners don't know that it's kind of a new tool to me, but basically what it does is like you can connect things like, I think the thing most people have used it for is connecting it with Kindle. And so like if you're reading a Kindle book and you highlight a section, you can hook it up automatically to Readwise, and Readwise like connects all your highlights across all your books that you're reading. Now Snipd connects to it, so it connects all your snips as well. And then I think I'm just starting to really learn how to use Readwise too. But basically one thing that Readwise is doing for me now is it's sending me a daily daily email with like 5 random highlights of things that I have highlighted, whether in Kindle books or in podcasts. And I think you probably are more familiar with this than I am, but I think there is some science behind, like, if you consistently see this information that you want to internalize, like if you're consistently seeing it again and again, like I may have read this book 5 years ago and I thought this insight was interesting and I clicked it. So now like it randomly shows up in my email. It's one of the 5 highlights. It's like, oh yeah, that is, I do like that idea. So anyways, I'm sure that tool does a lot more too, but that's how I'm using it so far.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good description. So one thing that also the Snipd app offers you is we have what we call also a daily recap, where you can actually set up to review your snips every now and then, get them pushed to you in a similar way as you just described it, or you can have a small widget on your phone home screen that reminds you of some of these great insights that you've come across, to just have them naturally flow back up into consciousness. And remind you of it.
Yes, 100%. So I'm curious, like I'm sure you obviously know the ins and outs of what you've created probably more than anyone. What are some of the things that you're using Snipd for, or are there functions that you're using that are like next level 201 type of tasks?
I think in that area, really one of our latest features fits into there, which is slowly but surely becoming this second feature that really resonates with people the most, like that stands out the most. And this is the ability to chat with a podcast episode. So you can actually use it while you're listening to ask what are the must listen moments of an episode, or when do they start talking about a certain topic. Sometimes, there are 2 to 3 hour episodes where you don't actually want to listen to everything, but you're just waiting for them to finally talk about the eye health, for example. And also afterwards, once you've finished it, it's great to actually come back to it. If you remember something, maybe you haven't snipped it, talking about Huberman, like what supplement did he recommend?
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
You can just briefly ask the AI. You can also ask, what I personally do is, maybe I have to take a step back to explain that. Like a bit like my personal process. So I listen to a podcast on Snipd. I let the AI take snips for me, and I also take snips myself, where I try to focus on really the most important ones for me. And then afterwards, I go through them. So I review them, and here what I'm trying to force myself to do is to come up with one single most important takeaway for myself. And usually there are more than one takeaways, and that's okay. But I just want to force myself to decide which one is, for me personally, with my goals, with whatever is going on, which one is the most important one. And this is then quite easy to do because I can just go, briefly scroll through the snips and be like, okay, yeah, this was really the best. And what I do here is sometimes the snip is already perfect and encapsulates that idea, and I can just star it within the Snipd app. But sometimes there's also something that takes ideas from the entire episode together from various areas. And what I love doing there is then just going into the chat and just tell it, hey, this insight was the most important one to me. Can you please create a really in-depth note on that? Which it then does, and I can again save it as a snip and star it. So yeah, this is definitely something that I'm using more and more, and has become more and more valuable to retrieve the information again that I've consumed and really turn it into the perfect format for me, such that I can most easily come back to it later on.
100%. Yeah, that you want it to be accessible. You want it to be resurfaceable. The Huberman supplements thing you just mentioned is so spot on. That's exactly what I was just thinking too, because he did an episode on cold and flu and protocols for cold and flu, what should you use? And recently when we had some cold and flu in my house, I was like, oh man, where's that Huberman episode? What was the supplements? There was some supplements I can't even remember the names of that he was swearing by. And by the way, it's zinc and NAC. I think it's N-acetylene or something like that. Anyways, I bought it. So Huberman should probably get a commission. But if I had listened to that one in Snipd, I think I listened to that way before I got Snipd, but it would have been that much more easily accessible. So, the other thing that is, I think podcasts have always had this problem in terms of discoverability or kind of rating episodes, right? So it's you want to go in theory, and you should in the the kind of mainstream podcast players, you should be able to search for the best episodes, basically. If I have not listened to Tim Ferriss before, what do people think are the best episodes? And I don't think it's super straightforward, but I think your tool is helping with this. So how are you kind of thinking about that discovery and rating of content?
Yeah. So this is actually a topic where we have a lot of ideas for the future. So let me separate it a bit to maybe talk first about what's happening in the app today, and then happy to go more into all of these ideas that we have for the future.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
So today, one of the incredible things that is happening is that our users are actually telling us what content was most valuable to them because they create the snips. So this is why actually in the app, we make this information public. How often was an episode snipped? And if you go to a show, you can sort all of the episodes of the podcast creator by how often they were snipped. And this has really been an amazing tool to get to really find these gems of episodes. Some of them quite old, but people just find them and start snipping them. So it goes back to where are the most insights?
100%. This is so cool. I love the ability to just go to a random podcast and search by most snipped episodes. And of course, I had to drop my own podcast into that and check that. And it was really interesting. It was this episode I did with Nicholas Cole, all about audience, creation and stuff like that. People snipped that one like crazy. I was like, oh, that's so interesting. So yeah, that is a really great function. I love it.
Yeah. And looking into the future, so basically some of the ideas. So this is all quite, let's say, rough. So bear with me.
Yep.
But basically, on a high level, how I'm thinking about this is, with all of this AI technology that we have now, we're basically at a point where one of the big innovations here, what's actually happened is that we've invented a way to communicate very effectively with machines so that they understand what we actually want. So if you look at how discovery algorithms work today on the big platforms like, let's say, YouTube, it's all driven by clicks and view time, whatever the metric is, but it's a singular metric, and it's just like, it just tries to recommend the thing that where it thinks, okay, you will, for example, on YouTube, you will watch the most of this.
Mm-hmm.
And this can be quite disconnected from what you actually want in your life, what your goals are.
Mm-hmm.
There is, of course, a very good overlap with how much money they make and how they make ads, but it might not actually be helping you get to where you want to go. So what I actually very much believe in, and I'm quite bullish on, is that in the future we can have discovery algorithms where we can more easily actually communicate what we want. And that doesn't take away that, hey, I still want to be recommended something that I actually want to watch all the way through, or listen. But please, now I'm very much, you mentioned earlier, you now got into executive coaching.
Yeah.
So why not allow you to actually communicate that to the algorithm in natural language?
Yep.
Just tell them, hey, this is what's happening now. And the algorithm adapts to that.
So let's use that as an example for a minute. So let's say I, in some future version of Snipd, let's say I go in, I say, hey, Snipd, I'm very interested in learning more about executive coaching. It's something I may want to do. I may want to, see if I can coach some people, but I want to get smarter about different executive coaching frameworks. I want a taste of like the different approaches that some of the best coaches in the world take. And I just want to get smarter about the whole thing. And I want to spend the next 2 weeks, every commute I have, like just learning. So do you think that, I'm curious what that could look like what the output of that could look like. What do you think of that could look like in your mind?
So for me, the output is still that you get content recommended to you.
But is it like just recommending an episode, or does it take it like beyond that? Does it go like, okay, Jim Lair, here's 10 minutes of Jim Lair that everybody snipped. And then here's 10 minutes of somebody else on another concept. And then maybe take it even a level beyond that and being like, okay, I want to put this into a whole sort of narrative for you. First, you need to understand what Jim Lair says here. Then you need to understand what Tony Robbins says here. You know what I'm saying? Like put it into a narrative, and it becomes almost like a teacher for you, right?
Yeah.
I'm just giving you product ideas here. This is going to be the
No, this is exactly how we actually think about it. Like basically this arc of where we want to get to. The way that I often what I often compare it to is you have this incredibly smart friend who's already an expert in what you want to learn, and who knows pretty exactly what you already know about this topic and what not. Like what content have you already consumed?
Yep.
It knows who you are, just like, in terms of what kind of style of content you prefer, just the overall, what kind of job you have, etc. And what your explicit goals are. And now this friend actually comes to you and says, hey, really like start with this episode. Like this is amazing. This is what you're going to learn here. Like focus on this and this and that. And this can be him also telling like, look, the second half of the episode, it's not really relevant for what you're trying to do here. So just listen to the first half an hour. And it's exactly how you said, like that can start with just content, but it can be like, it can now also afterwards actually be commentary, right? You can basically discuss your takeaways with this friend, right? Like this is what I took away from it was, how did you see that?
Yeah.
And if there can also be content inserted where, okay, there is no podcast, but that's another incredible thing with this AI technology. it can actually also provide you with additional information, basically create like a short 5-minute, 10-minute podcast that you listen in between them, where it says like, hey, here's some more information.
Yeah.
Once you have this information, you'll actually get much more out of this podcast.
Like
that
a
you're gonna listen to
Google,
next.
like the Google LLM thing, the auto-generated podcast. Is that kind of what you're thinking of?
Basically, that's all part of the possibilities. And yeah, I just always go back to more like trying to not think too much in like the AI terms of, I don't know, Notebook LM, and now we can do AI generated content and all of these things, but more, hey, there's just this friend, which I already have some friends who also listen to a lot of podcasts, and they've given me the best recommendations, and I've had the best conversations with them afterwards.
This thing's going to put me out of business. This is what my podcast and newsletter is all about anyways. Trying to be that friend. That's all right. Maybe I can make an AI of myself and all my own recommendations. Yeah, that's cool. I like that. That's a good way to think about it. It's like a really smart friend who's like recommending things to you. So we mentioned the Readwise integration, and you mentioned Notion. Are there other obvious things coming down the pipe there where you're like, oh, it would be so cool if Snip connected to this, or anything like that you guys are working on or could see coming down the pipe?
So just topics that we're quite excited about. I mean, we already touched upon them a little bit. One very interesting development is what Notebook LM has been doing. So maybe just for some context, in case people listening are not familiar with it, Notebook LM it's a product by Google. One of the features that they have is you can upload any kind of content, be that text, be that it can also be a presentation, it can be a video, and it generates an AI generated podcast where two hosts talk about the content.
Yep.
So it's not just text to speech, but it's really transformed into a conversation. Now, this is very interesting from many different angles. Like, one is this can help in reviewing information. We have all of our users, they're creating all of these snips, they're saving all of this amazing information. This can be a new way of how to come back to refresh your memory on some of these things in a very enjoyable way, without re-listening one-to-one the exact same thing, or reading through the snips. And it can also be very interesting on the other side of what we just said, with on this side of recommending content, where it can provide information in between podcasts. You can now even go out, or in the future you'll be able to go out and say, hey, I have a very specific thing that I would like to learn about. And actually there's no podcast on this exact thing. Could you just create me something for that?
Create a podcast. Yeah. If you haven't, for listeners, if you haven't messed with Google's Notebook LLM, it's super cool. Yeah, I did that. Like, I had like for work, I'm working the finance industry, and I have like I had one of the Wall Street firms put out a pretty dense, like 30 or 40 page paper on this asset class, private credit. And I was hosting a podcast. I host another podcast for my day job. And I was hosting a podcast on the topic like the next day. And I was like, oh man, I do not have time to read this 40 page PDF, super dense. And so I dropped it into Notebook LLM, and it popped out like a 12-minute conversational podcast of two fake people talking about it. And I was like, this is perfect. It gave me exactly the context that I needed. So yeah, like, put that type of capability into Snipd, whatever you want to learn. Yeah. I mean, it's like, hey, even if I want to learn the encyclopedia or something like that, drop it in, create a podcast for me. And then you interact with it as you've said. Like, I like your idea too of being able to like talk to it and be like, okay, I see how you described the summary of that takeaway AI. I see how you did that. That's valuable. But I also want to like give you some feedback. Like, here's why it's so relevant to me, and here's my takeaway. And so like, make a note of that, and then like we talked about, people have different workflows. Mine goes to Readwise, then to Evernote, and it's like, boom, there's the AI stuff. but here's my note too, how I summed it up in my own words.
Yeah. And maybe as another topic that we're quite excited about is, it's a bit of in a similar domain, but now all of these AI models have gained the ability for voice, as in like to talk to them in natural voice instead of typing, which is something that makes a lot of sense for us. Like if you think about it, if you listen to podcasts or also other spoken audio content, which we can get to as well later on, but you are hands-free, right? Like often you're doing something with your eyes. So it's very natural to actually interact in voice. We've had like one of the typical use cases that we hear every now and then is, especially if you listen to something like Huberman, it can get quite technical. It can also be very easy to drift off briefly and then like, hey, what was he talking about? Or you mentioned some technical terms. Like I listen to Huberman every now and then, but I don't listen to so many episodes that I'm like completely in all of the details.
Yeah, when it's just him with a when it's just him with a microphone for like 3 hours, you got to be dialed in, like, because he can get super technical. But I hear you.
And these can then be moments where you can just very easily just ask the AI, hey, could you play like this term that he just mentioned? Like,
Yes.
What is that? Can you explain that to me?
I'd love that. Like Peter Attia's podcast, The Drive, would be perfect for that, because he's dropping these like 20-syllable words nonstop, and you're like, whoa, what was that scientific term you just described? I like that. Yeah.
And it even goes in the direction of, I recently had a conversation with a big podcast fan, and he was listening to an episode of, I don't remember the podcast, but it was about the Roman Empire, like a 4-hour episode.
Oh, yeah. Empire. Okay. Yeah.
And apparently they talked about a certain battle where they didn't really go into detail and they just like brushed over it like really briefly. And he was telling me how desperately in that moment he wanted to know more about this battle. And he actually ended up pausing the podcast, going to ChatGPT and starting researching all about this battle.
Interesting.
And did that for 20 minutes and then came back and continued listening.
Yep.
So this is also a very interesting area that I'm curious to.
I wonder if
explore.
it was hardcore history. I think I've heard that one is.
It could
popular.
be. It could be.
Yeah.
I think we actually never mentioned the show. But
Well, I think that's a really good example too, because like you and I are talking about specific like use cases of Huberman and this and that, but like this is so much broader too, and like it's as broad as human interests are broad, right? And like I'm a parent of 3 kids, and I my mind immediately goes to education too, and I'm already seeing AI tools pop up in their lives, and you know when they're learning math, they're using an AI tool now that is like the AI is getting feedback from them, and it sees that, okay, Charlie does not understand this concept. Let me keep rerouting more problems to him until he shows that he understands it, and then I will start routing the next level of problems to him. But like, it's going to be really cool to see how informed and smart people can get on whatever topics they want to. It's just going to get easier, right? It's the information. You're going to be able to interact with information in a way that is just so much easier for you, however you want to interact with it. It's so that's exciting, I think.
100%. And it can be one area that I'm very excited about as well. It's not just about the purely consuming information, but you can use these tools now more and more, a bit how you described it with your son, that it's also applying it or it helping you apply it. You can actually just ask it like, okay, I have now all of these insights. I just listened to use again the Huberman example. I just listened to this episode. Like, can you break this down into like, how can I apply this to my life?
Yes.
What do you recommend?
Right.
Because this is the other gap that is often missing, where it's, we love consuming all of this information, but then we don't do anything with it. We just keep living our lives the same way, like learning at the end of the day is changing behavior. not
take everything
collecting
Huberman
information.
just recommended and just auto schedule it into my calendar. So you'll open your calendar, it'll be like cold plunge at 4 a.m., then sauna, then this, then that.
And of course, AG1.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. As a podcaster, that's a must. You have to. So I know you kind of intentionally talk about the spoken content as opposed to necessarily just saying podcasts. So I'm assuming there's other things. Audiobooks is one area I want to discuss with you and what you're thinking there. I listen to a decent bit of audiobooks, I would say. Actually, one use case I have is for this podcast, I interview authors fairly frequently, and I will typically I prefer to do the audiobook just because I have a very limited amount of time, and basically my time for stuff like this is that commute time that I mentioned. And I prefer not to read like self-help books and things like that, like right before bed. I'd rather be reading history or fiction to sort of like lose myself in a story and drift off to sleep. But I have this problem with regards to audiobooks is that I'm not able to organize my thoughts or basically do everything that Snipd does. So tell me what you're thinking about there, what the future may hold as well.
Yeah. So in general, we always think of ourselves as a spoken audio platform, even though today we are, of course, mostly a podcast player. In the future, we want to support audiobooks. We want to support any kind of spoken audio content you have. And in fact, actually already today, we do have the ability to upload audio files to Snipd. So as long as you have an audiobook as an MP3 file, if you have meeting recordings, or even something that I do personally, I transform blog posts into audio files, which I do with just a script on my laptop. This is not built into Snipd yet, but and then I upload it to Snipd. So actually today, if you can actually already upload your audiobooks to Snipd. We do handle the cover art, we read out the chapters, and these kind of things. So you can actually already do it today. I'll give you a bit more information there. So usually the big question there, however, is like, where do you get the audiobook from? Because these days, most of the audiobooks, if you buy them, are behind closed ecosystems. Usually people get them from Audible. So there are two options here. There's a service where you can actually buy audiobooks and you can download the MP3 file. Unfortunately, I don't remember the name right now.
Okay, that's fine. You can tell me later. I'll put it in the show notes.
And the other option that most of our users use is actually if you have your audiobooks in Audible, there are open source tools available with which you can actually extract the audio file for personal use, of course, and then upload it to Snipd. So there's a tool called Libation that I personally use. It's open source. It's basically an audiobook manager that you can have on your laptop. You can connect it to your Audible account. And one of the things that it does is it extracts the MP3 file for you for personal use. And then, of course, you can use it on Snipd as well.
Okay. That's interesting. So I am listening to, that is where I listen to audiobooks on Audible. So you would get this tool, Libation, you would download the MP3 and then you can upload the MP3 to Snipd. That's how the workflow would be. Okay.
Exactly.
What's the longer term plan? Any thoughts on how you can make that less?
Yeah, I mean,
friction?
the long-term vision for us is that you can actually get the audiobook like directly in Snipd. So especially you also mentioned this other feature that we have where we automatically identify which books get recommended on a podcast, and you can see already the book with cover, with the description, author. You can actually also with the author click on the author and see on which podcast episodes the author has appeared.
That's cool.
And today we just have this link to the internet if you want to get this audiobook, redirect you to Google. But in the future, there we just want to have this one-click experience of, hey, this is an amazing book, one click, you've bought it, and now you have it in Snipd, and you can listen to it directly in Snipd with all of the native capabilities of Snipd.
Now, let me ask you, just in terms of, if you think about the traditional places where people are listening to podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc., tell me a little bit just about how you're thinking about them, because I on the one hand, I'm kind of like, this is my personal opinion, is that there has not been a tremendous amount of innovation in these players. And I don't feel like the user experience is like that intuitive. I've personally loved the user experience of Snip much more. It's just much more intuitive. I can, like you said, I can sort by like most snipped episodes. I can create snips. It's just doing a lot more for me. So like, I'm curious, like to me, I look at like an Apple or a Spotify, and I'm not asking you to like throw these guys under the bus, because who knows I don't know if you have any kind of relationship, or maybe there's some potential partnerships in the future or something like that. But like, I guess I'm curious to like, I see a lack of innovation there, and I'm kind of like, gosh, Apple has more cash than like many, many countries in the world. Like, why are you guys at Snipd able to do this, and why are they kind of stagnant? Is it just because you're a big company, you got a lot of stuff to focus on, and that just hasn't been a focus? Or what do you think generally about these more legacy podcast players?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, it's, from the outside, difficult to say why they are taking certain decisions internally. The way that we look at it is that we completely agree that there hasn't been enough innovation in this space. That's also why, we started this company, because we believe there's so much more than you can do, especially now with AI coming up. With respect to, like, there's one thing that really helps us, or at least me personally, when like thinking about what to do and also like what kind of innovation to come up with, is like we have a purpose that goes beyond just listening to a podcast. And I believe that is one of the things that some of these other apps have struggled with, where it's just, well, if it's just about hitting play and then at some point hitting pause again and audio should play in between, then why do anything else? And we've really come out there and said, okay, no, we are the podcast app for people who listen because they want to learn, right? They want to become more knowledgeable. And now you have something to work against, right? You can say, okay, then it makes total sense that these people should be able to retrieve this information again, right? They should know which podcasts have more insights in them than others.
Yeah.
And if it's not just about having some background knowledge, you care very much about what they talk about in the podcast. So having like, one of the features that I haven't mentioned yet is we have this little sneak peek into the episode where you basically get a short AI overview of what they talk about. These things suddenly all make sense. And that has helped us a lot in building some of these things, also taking certain product decisions in the app that are trade-offs, as in, everything you add takes away from something else. So just as an example, I often say, like, if you are a podcast listener who listens just to true crime stories, like, we're probably not the place for you.
Yeah.
Like, we even tell you in the onboarding, like, depends on when you join Snipd. At some point we started in the onboarding to actually ask you, like, why do you listen to podcasts? And if you tell us, hey, I just listen because I just want to be distracted, then we let you know in the onboarding, like, cool, like, use Snip, try it out, but just beware, like, we didn't build it for you. So
right.
So maybe there might be some product decisions that we've taken that you might find weird. So this has helped us a lot. But to wrap this up, or to bring it full circle with these other players, I do believe that what actually has happened now is that we have just built a better app for almost all listeners, even though we focus on this particular listener. So I do believe that it's actually what we've built and the technology has actually become interesting to some of these bigger players out there.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, I have that. I don't know what you call the phenomena of like when technology advances and then you look at the tool you were using and you get annoyed at it. But like that's happening to me with Audible because I'm like, why can't I hit something here that saves this for me? This is dumb. What do I have to like have a pen and paper next to me while I'm driving in the car, like to write this down? So, what's the end game there? So like, do you feel like, and I don't know how much you can say or not say, but like, do you feel like is Snipd an acquisition target for one of these companies would be one question. And, or would you ever want to like license your technology? Like what if Amazon showed up at your door and was like, hey, there's a lot of people pissed off on Audible who say they want your function. Can we license your technology? Like, is that possible? How are you thinking about all that?
So first of all, I definitely know that there are a lot of people pissed off with Audible and they want to use our technology with Audible. So two things here again. Like one, we definitely see that Snipd could be acquired one day and integrated into these bigger platforms. There are various scenarios where I can see that makes a lot of sense for both sides. Audible is a good example of, Audible also has podcasts, and you can see a very good partnership being created there. But of course, you would have to see, in detail how that might look like and how much sense it makes. But
can I just ask you, are there patents that you have on some of this stuff? Or is there anything stopping Amazon or anybody from building the same thing?
No, we don't have like a IP patent or something like that. I mean, that's something that's quite uncommon in the software world.
Got it. Okay.
So I mean, we are in general open to having these conversations, and with some we've also had some conversations in the past. But from just the perspective of what we do on a day-to-day basis, what we decide what to build in the product, we don't use that as a guiding factor. I believe at the end of the day, the only thing that you can do is build a great business, and that you do that by building an incredible product that people love, and people are, because they love it, also willing to pay for it and keep paying for it over time. And that is almost impossible to do by saying, oh, but what would Apple want to buy?
Sure. Well, you've successfully turned me into somebody who pays for podcast players now, and I was not that person before. So, but yeah, I think like you said, like creating, I think that makes a ton of sense to me. Like just being hyper focused on creating an awesome experience for your customer, and some of the other stuff will take care of itself ultimately. That seems like the right way to think about it. All right. I'm conscious that we're coming up on an hour and probably got to get you out of here. But is there anything else that just on this broader topic that we've been talking about, just leveraging technology and especially AI to acquire and store and then ultimately implement, knowledge that we gain? Is there anything else that you're using in your life or anything else that you recommend to people that you find particularly effective on that kind of journey?
Yeah, I think so my number one recommendation there, besides Snipd, of course, in a way, it's not very surprising. Like everyone knows the tool, like it's ChatGPT or, use Claude, whatever your personal favorite is. But I think my recommendation that is a bit more novel is like, I think people don't use it enough. I think there's just so many more situations for which we can use it. Like you can use it as a reflection partner. Like, for example, what I do with a podcast, like I do it within Snipd, but if you can also do that with other things in your life, and you just put all of that into the context of ChatGPT or Claude.
Yeah.
I think we still, in general, including myself, I think we're still not yet utilizing all of the benefits that we're actually getting just from this text chat interface. Just because we don't feel comfortable yet using it for these things. And more, I think we're just over time getting more and more used to doing that, using it as a mentor, as a advice, as a brainstorm partner, as basically a lot of these things. So to sum it up, to wrap it up, get to a point, my recommendation would be to just start using it for many, many more use cases, to just try it out and be more adventurous there. And maybe one last prediction there. What I sort of see is that the next question there is just, is this chat interface the best UI for what you want to do there? And this is actually where I am bullish on, where I see in the future more and more of more specialized apps like ourselves coming out, where the fundamental underlying technology is still, it's the LLM, and the intelligence does come from someone like OpenAI and Anthropic, but you've just created a completely different experience where it makes it much more seamless and maybe also guided to use all of these abilities.
That makes sense to me. Yeah, I mean, I could see like opening up your iPhone, assuming that's what we're all still using in 5 years or whatever, and all the apps being more like agents, so to speak, that you open it and this is your agent for your mental health. And it has had, 100 hours of conversations with you talking about things you're worried about, things you're optimistic about, whatever. And you've kind of asked it to leverage the expertise of the best therapists in the world to guide you and ask you questions and give you recommendations and stuff like that. And that's just one app. Then there's the app on your physical fitness. Then there's the app on, things that are related to your day job, So to me, I fully agree with that and where things are going. And it's all sitting on this broader technology, but it's all like then specialized and then personalized for all these different use cases. And then maybe, who knows, maybe it's like a unbundling thing. Then it all comes back to one thing anyways. And it's just like, something that's just with you all the time. You don't have to mess with apps. It's just, it automatically knows what your problem is and what you're asking about. But it's cool stuff. I'm been following this news with DeepSeek the last couple of days, and how all of a sudden it seems like maybe the cost of compute is going to be less than what we'd been thinking for some of these AIs and stuff like that. So anyways, man, it's cool. This has been a great conversation. I love nerding out on this stuff. I'm certainly not an expert by any means, but just very curious about all this stuff. And I think what you and the team are doing at Snipd is really cool. And I wish you good luck in terms of where you go with it from here. I guess for our listeners, would you have any final thoughts, or is there anywhere you want people to follow you or anything like that, or anything?
I mean, you can follow me on X. Kevin Ben Smith is my handle on X. And otherwise, my suggestion would be, definitely give Snipd a shot.
Yeah.
Actually, we can maybe also I'm happy to add a special link that you can add to the show notes if
awesome.
People want to try out the premium version for 1 month for free.
Awesome.
Just try it out. Experience the future.
Oh, that's really cool. Thanks, Kevin. I'll look forward to adding that link into the show notes. People can check it out. And otherwise, any final travel recommendations for Americans who want to visit Switzerland? Is there anything they should make sure they should check out? And also, if you want to just share your home address, all our listeners can just book time to come stay with you.
Yeah, I have a huge 2.5 room apartment. It's,
Don't worry. As soon as you get acquired by Amazon or something like that, there'll be a lot more space.
So this question is actually very difficult to answer.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
there's so many beautiful things to do in Switzerland, but I will of course give you let's say 3. Let's see which ones I can think of right now. But in general, I actually get this question quite a lot by friends, especially from the US. So I've actually written a Notion page that I now also always send to people.
Oh, perfect. Yes.
So you can also add that to the show notes.
100%. Will. Yeah.
Like I hope people don't expect too much of it. It's just like I just wrote that initially for a friend, and then next person asked, and I added a couple of things to it. But hey, like if you're listening now, like one thing is either come in summer or in winter. In between, it's not so nice, but summer and winter is like incredible.
Okay.
I personally actually really love summer, just because you get all of the beautiful things in the mountains, but you also get a lot of beautiful things in the cities. So one of the things I love the most is how like Switzerland is a country of mountains and lakes. And people usually don't know about the lakes, but these lakes, they're so beautiful, they're clean. The water is on the same level as drinking water, cleanliness and cleanliness. So on a beautiful summer day, you just go to the lake. You can jump into the lake anywhere, and you can just go out for a swim.
Amazing.
You can go to the rivers. One of the amazing things is you can take a floating device, like an inflatable mattress or inflatable boat, and just jump on the river with a couple of friends, get a couple of beers, and just stay on the river for 2 hours and just float down.
Love it.
Okay, so that let's say that was one.
Okay.
Even though that was a lot of information.
I'm asking the right person. This is great.
So 2, go to Ticino. This is the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland. It's on the other side of the Alps.
Yeah.
For me, it's the closest thing to paradise on earth.
Wow.
It just has a certain feel to it, especially if you usually go there with a train. It's a 2-hour direct train connection from Zurich, where I live.
Okay.
And you go through the Gotthard Tunnel, which is one of the longest train tunnels in the world, or maybe the longest one. It goes through the Alps. So you're in this tunnel for like 20 minutes, and it's dark outside. And on the other side, you come out, and suddenly it's like Mediterranean. You have palm trees. You feel like you're in like Italy.
Wow.
Maybe you've heard of this region, like the Como Lake.
Yes.
This is basically so Como Lake. It's very close to Switzerland, to the border of Switzerland, and Ticino is basically on the Swiss side of this area.
Okay. Love that.
Yeah, and then third one, final one, maybe one for winter. If you come in winter, go take the Glacier Express. It's a panorama train that starts.
It's like glass, like head to ceiling to floor. Yeah. Oh,
exactly.
That's cool. I think I've seen videos of that before.
Yeah. I actually just did it for the first time a couple of weeks ago with my wife, and you're driving for, depending on where you get on, I think it's then 7 hours or maybe even 7.5 hours in total. It's just driving through the Alps. Wow. And you have this amazing scenery on the left and on the right of you, and you get some beautiful food while doing so. That's a very enjoyable, relaxed kind of thing that people usually don't think about when coming to Switzerland.
All right, I'm sold. I'm coming. All right, cool. I'll let you know when I'm coming, but this is awesome. Kevin, thanks for everything. This has been a really fun conversation. I've learned a lot. Hopefully our audience did too, and hopefully they'll go check out Snipd, because I'm having a blast using it, and I think everybody will too. So thank you again for your time. I appreciate it.
Cool. Greg, thanks a lot for the conversation. I also really enjoyed it.
All right, there you go, my friends. That was Kevin Smith. Really enjoyed that conversation with Kevin, and I really love what he and the team are building. It is a super interesting technology, and like I said, I've been using it all the time, so highly recommend. He was cool enough to share that promo link, so check out the show notes if you'd like to try Snipd for free. I've also included links to the other tools that were mentioned in this conversation and a link to Kevin's Notion page with all of his Switzerland travel recommendations. I need to get over there and further explore that country ASAP. That sounds really amazing. All right, my friend, remember to subscribe to the Intentional Wisdom newsletter at gregcampion.substack.com. I'm actually about to sit down and write an article right now about everything that I'm learning and thinking about related to artificial intelligence, and I'll include more detail on this episode in that newsletter. gregcampion.substack.com. Check it out if you want to receive that. That's it for today, my friend. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.